Good morning. This is Palm Beach County Election Supervisor Susan Bucher meeting with the Palm Beach Post Editorial Board. Good morning, Ms. Bucher. Thank you for coming. We'll begin with Ms. Bucher giving some evaluation she's reached of the county's voting system, which she'll explain in her report, and then we'll go to questions from the editorial board and from some reporters. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to thank the Palm Beach Post for providing an opportunity for us to speak to the constituents out in Palm Beach County. I want to start by saying that I began to work at the Supervisor of Elections office in 2009. I inherited the voting equipment that we currently use, the Sequoia system. Unfortunately, it was purchased by my predecessor. It is antiquated analog technology. And we were the only large county in the state of Florida, and in fact only one of two counties, to purchase this type of voting equipment. The modems that are compatible with this voting equipment were tried by the other county, which happens to be Indian River County, in 2008. Unfortunately, they found that that technology was established in 1970, and there was no screen filter in place that would allow them not to upload duplicate results, and they did not have a positive experience with the modems that are associated with this voting equipment. In speaking to the Division of Elections, I found that the equipment was certified by the state of Florida. However, the director of voting systems was out on medical leave. His assistant director was out on maternity leave, and apparently the voting system was certified. They did assure me that the modems were tested. Unfortunately, it's a limited test of which you have a copy of what testing documents they provided. But the bottom line is that I was in the audience when the county commission elected to purchase this equipment. I had lobbied some of the county commissioners, urging them to open up their scope and look at other companies. To my surprise, I did not speak at that meeting because when I got there, the Secretary of State was there intending to do the same thing, and he did so. We single-sourced to Sequoia because our tabulation system was already Sequoia, and it complemented their equipment. Unfortunately, as you move through these documents, you'll see a memo from the Director of the Division of State, the first item that you see, and he does indicate that apparently my predecessor declined to purchase the modems, and in fact, in having discussions with the Sequoia and now Dominion, who took over Sequoia's equipment representative for us, he's not really pushing us to purchase those modems because of the documentation that exists about their functionability. You can see the next document indicates that every other county except for Indian River in the state of Florida is using primarily two systems, either ES&S or Premier. We have the only analog technology in the state of Florida, and we're living in a digital age. You'll see that there is a document from the Supervisor of Elections in Indian River County, and she lays out the discussion of her experience in using these antiquated modems. Does not use them now. The company officials were on the ground when the modems malfunctioned. They had an overcount of over 10,000 votes. The next document you'll see is an independent contractor that reviewed the Sequoia modem system for Cook County in Chicago, Illinois. And I've highlighted for your information on page number 1 the results of what they concluded in using these types of modems. Only 56% of the precincts in Cook County were able to upload using the existing Sequoia modems. You can see documentation says that there was a failure rate of 44% on the next page. The next document shows you the testing requirements that the state went through, and page 5 of that document details that part of the testing was in fact to test the modems. I'm not sure exactly to what extent they tested them, but obviously they don't appear to be very functional with technology developed in 1970. I did request some information from the Division of Elections, and they have readily provided that information as to the fact that the modems were in fact tested and I couldn't speak to anybody who performed those tests because they're no longer there. There is a requirement in the
They being people, not the
They
technology.
being people. There is a requirement in the certification process that outlines the requirement to test telecommunication devices like these modems to make sure that they work. And so I'm not really sure of the scope of what the testing was. Now, the bottom line is, unfortunately, even after all of these years, the County Commission purchased, at the behest of my predecessor, technology that was developed in 1970 for the purpose of testing college entrance exams. The company has not put any research or development money into that system because they didn't anticipate selling them, but they did sell them to us. I vowed to work with Commissioner Marcus, who was there on the ground during this election, to upgrade and change our voting equipment. The voting equipment that we have should not have been purchased, and we'll work as hard as we can. Commissioner Marcus would like to go to the legislature and get a local option of touchscreens back. And
Old, new, old, new,
Well,
old, new.
I will tell you that we've done some research, and I asked the Division of Elections certification team, it was the only purpose that you revoke certification for touchscreen, the fact that the law was changed, and they said yes. And I asked if the law was to allow for touchscreen on a local option, would you be able to turn that certification back on quickly? And they have indicated that yes, they could. Now, if the legislation is not successful, we've talked to the current vendor that we have, and they do have a system that they're working on, and they plan to submit for certification at the state level soon, and that has updated digital equipment. It has built-in modems. It's today's technology, and I've provided you with a copy of a brief description of that type of equipment. Now, I will guarantee you that I'm not going to land on this equipment until I find out what other equipment is down the road trying to be certified. But the fact of the matter is that I was in the audience in 2008. I lobbied the County Commission not to purchase this equipment. They sole sourced it to Sequoia. The equipment is antiquated, and it pains me to sit before you and speak to the voters in Palm Beach County to tell them that, because we've been through a lot.
So the gist of what you're saying is that one way or the other, Palm Beach County needs new voting equipment.
Yes, sir.
Either remove back to touch screens or an updated form of the equipment from the company that supplies them now.
That's correct.
Okay.
Or another company if there's a better system.
Okay. Remind us, do the touchscreen machines still exist? Are they still here, or were they sold?
The touchscreens only exist to meet the ADA requirements. They are audio
Right, okay.
and also touchscreens. So we do have a few of them. Unfortunately, the state just paid us back for the resale of the touchscreens. We got $288,000 for the millions of tax dollars that were spent on those machines. And so we find ourselves with some difficulty in being able to upload results in a quick manner. Obviously, based on the information that I've laid out to you, we are unable to purchase, to throw taxpayer money away on 1970 technology that's analog when we live in a digital age.
Do you have a cost estimate for either one of those options?
Well, they tell me that the old option was about $6 million. And my predecessor chose not to purchase that, even though the state provided funding to include a modem.
Okay.
And I'm sure it was based on the reports that I've given you. And I have the vendor for Sequoia, who has a new system that he's laid out, and he intends to be here the second week in December and pitch us on his system. It's not a system that has been certified yet, so it is actually not available. But we will work as hard as we can to either pass legislation to provide us the local option to go back to touchscreens, and if that is not successful, we will have to investigate any new equipment that's being certified. Palm Beach County and all the counties in the state will have to upgrade their equipment in 2016 to meet ADA requirements. That law used to say 2012. And it was changed last year by legislation to increase the years to 16 because their funding was a problem. And so the technology that's being presented by Sequoia now indicates that that technology would meet the requirements of ADA that are going to be required in 2016.
Okay.
Does the county have the money to be able to afford the new equipment once you figure out which system you want to go with?
Well, I have a firm commitment from Commissioner Marcus. She's always been on the canvassing board and involved, and she spent countless days and hours with us and realizes that the equipment purchase was probably the wrong direction. And she has committed to work hard to try and find the funding so that we can have a system that has the ability to do what every other county in Palm Beach does, or in the state of Florida does, and that is upload timely election results.
And even under the best conditions, though, would you expect to be able to have a new system in place before 2012?
Yes.
And again, this is all to address the issue of timeliness, right? It's not a question that the results are flawed in some way. It's the question of how quickly the results can get back and tabulated.
That's correct.
Okay.
But you have these giant tabulating machines in the main office, and you have precinct scanners in each precinct that voters actually put the ballot into. Are you saying the precinct scanners are antiquated and analog?
Yes.
And so they couldn't be converted to a more modern modem system just
No.
by adding the modem?
No. You can add the old 1970 modem, but you can see there's studies indicating that those modems commonly fail.
But Sequoia can't come up with a new modem that could be converted to go with those machines that you already have.
They're not working on that. What they actually are working on is an entire new system.
You mean it's completely new?
Yeah, it's in your document.
Okay.
He outlines exactly what the system would be. It's this document towards the end.
Okay.
And it shows you what the document would be. It indicates that it's digital technology versus analog of the current Insight that we own.
Okay.
And the modems are actually built into the system. And they're today's technology rather than 1970.
I guess I don't understand what you mean though by they're analog. They're scanning it. What are they doing? Just a wheel clicks and some physical counter counts up, and that's why it's analog as opposed to recording it digitally? What is the difference between our analog stuff and a digital system?
Analog was developed in the 1970s. It's not compatible with digital equipment. That's the new technology. Everything is digital now. So we cannot just adapt some off-the-shelf current modem to the current system. There is a modem we could buy, but obviously there's studies indicating that that modem is faulty. And my predecessor chose not to purchase that, and I understand why.
But it's counting. I mean, the scanners count electronically, don't they?
They do. They count electronically, but the technology was not something that was current.
And the cost. When the new system was brought in, you said it only cost $6 million? I thought it cost well over. So only the modem. So how much did we spend to put in the new election equipment that goes into the precincts that you want to replace?
Well, you'll see that the Department of State sent a check, and they purchased one scanner per precinct, and the check was $4,416,000. That payment included fee for a modem. They chose not to buy that modem. Instead, they chose to buy more optical scan equipment so we would have some backups.
But didn't the county put in money as well?
No, the scanners were purchased by the state from a pool of money that was brought down by HAVA, Help America Vote Act, at the federal level.
And all the other equipment they had to buy, like the voting booths, would still be fine. You wouldn't have to replace those.
Right.
Will you be making a formal recommendation to the county at some point on
Yes, we will. In discussing the issues that are affiliated with this, with Commissioner Marcus, she indicated that they could have a time sometime in January so that we can go present the information that I'm presenting to you today.
And just to clarify a little bit, so you're talking about touchscreen machines. Are those the Sequoia machines you mentioned here, or are those two separate options you're pursuing?
You know, we have the Sequoia touchscreen machines, one in every precinct. They exist and they are certified, but only up until the year 2016, because at that point we have to have ADA match equipment for everybody. And that year used to be 2012. So they do have a limited certification of touchscreen, and upon Commissioner Marcus's investigation, she is recommending that we go to the legislature and ask them to allow us to have a local option to purchase touchscreens as our voting system.
And is that different from the Sequoia system that they're coming to pitch you soon, or would the Sequoia system they're coming to pitch you soon be a touchscreen?
No, that's a different system. That's a scanner.
And wouldn't that cost like $16 to $20 million? To
I
go
don't
back
know
to
the cost
touchscreens?
yet.
But that's about what it cost the first time, and you got less than $300,000 back for them.
But
We-
again, just to be clear, what you will say to the county commission is if you want to get results quicker, these are the two options that I
Well, and
think are out
frankly,
there.
in 2016, they're going to have to change the voting equipment regardless.
And
That's
you
a
mean-
law.
And you mean everything, not just the occasional touch screens that you have now for certain voters, for disabled voters?
Yes.
Everything?
Everything, and
Every
that's
bit of
throughout the state of
equipment.
Florida, because we've agreed to meet ADA requirements so that everybody can vote on the same kind of voting system. Not the, certain disabled people have to vote on the touch screen right now, either audio or visual, if they have particular disabilities, and everybody else votes and puts their ballot through a scanner right now.
So will these touch screens that Commissioner Marcus wants to get the local option for have a paper trail attached to them?
I don't know. We have to take a look at what will be reef certified if that legislation passes.
Do touchscreens we already have create a paper trail?
No,
Well,
they have a cartridge.
right.
Yeah, just like the scanner, but the scanner has a tape that comes with it too.
Would you support going back to touchscreens? Do you prefer them?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on why?
You can imagine the difficulty of handling about 781,500 thousand pieces of paper in this last election. We have never had in any county a countywide recount dealing with paper yet. It might even be easier to have a countywide than to have to go search for, instance, a school board race. We were looking for 65,000 voters' ballots, but they were 2 pages. So we were looking for a lot of paper. And the inventory process is quite difficult. The high-speed counters that we have, the 400Cs from Sequoia, traditionally eat ballots. When you send the ballots through, on election day, you send your ballot through a scanner, and a cartridge picks up. It looks like an 8-track tape player. And a cartridge picks up the votes, and we tabulate by sticking that cartridge in our tabulating system. If we have to do a manual recount, as we just did, we have to take the actual ballots and send them through what we call our 400Cs. They're high-speed scanners, and they crumple ballots and damage them. So then we have a process where those ballots are sent to the canvassing board. The canvassing board has to determine voter intent. We have to print a new ballot. We have to put the voter intent on that ballot. The canvassing board gets to see it a second time, and then we send it out to be tabulated, the good ballot, and we keep the damaged ballot in a different place.
Boy, touch screens, I can hear the political fight over that now.
Well, the reality is you can see that, in every other large county, they either have one of 2 very popular systems, ES&S or Premier.
Right.
And obviously they don't have the kinds of time problems that we do. And
Those
that,
aren't touchscreen systems, right? I mean, those
no,
are...
But
They're-
they're digital.
yes,
And that's the key,
Do
okay?
they have modems, ESS and Premier?
yeah.
Well, you mentioned paper, and how much of it, and I believe there was a comment by Commissioner Marcus after about way too much paper around here. Do you have a handle yet on the 500 ballots and how they were misplaced, speaking of paper?
Yeah, and I've laid that out here.
Okay, please do for us, thanks.
What happens is that when we have the damaged when we have damaged ballots, or people fill their ballots out in very unusual ways, or they use whiteout or anything like that, our system is very sensitive and those ballots won't read. So the process goes that we send those ballots that cannot be read to the canvassing board. The canvassing board establishes voter intent. We print a new ballot. We have somebody mark the ballot according to the intent established by the canvassing board, and then those documents come back to the canvassing board. They put the damaged ballots in this box and the duplicated ballots in a new box. We put record numbers on each one so that we can marry them up in the future if somebody wants to see them. And what happened in this case is that we filled up a box of damaged ballots. We filled up a box of duplicated ballots. We put a red seal on it that to us represents that those ballots had not been counted. Those ballots were then transported to our tabulation area about 10 feet out of the canvassing door, and inadvertently somebody took that red seal off, did not count those ballots, put a blue seal back on, and sent them to be interfiled with the precinct absentee ballot, so we would be prepared for the audit, the manual audit after the election.
And the blue seal means?
Blue seal means counted.
So how do you
Okay.
find out?
Well, we were recounting the absentee ballots in the school board race, and immediately we have an audit, and we found that we were over the number of votes that we were in the beginning. And so we stopped everything and investigated, and we actually found the box of damaged ballots that corresponded to the ballots that had been interfiled already.
How do you know those particular ballots were the ones that hadn't been, oh, because the damaged ballots were still not filed?
But the damaged ballots are in a box, and we have records to correspond. So where we had one vote in one precinct absentee, we now had two. And the second one was a duplicated ballot with a record number on it. So we were able to go back to the box and find these ballots were intermingled, but they don't look different than any other ballot. So we recounted 100% of the absentee ballots while the results were still unofficial, and got an accurate count of absentee votes in Palm Beach County.
Do you have a clear idea of how the red seal was taken off and the blue seal was put on?
I really do. When you work people 18 to 20 hours a day and they're in haste to try and get the results out, it was a human error.
You know who did it?
I don't. We have tape, and I'll roll it back, and we will deal with that internally.
And what do you do to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Well, we have a plan to have some verification, to not only have one person at those counters, but to have a team of people that will verify. We have a process in place for exactly this. You put a red seal on, you record the number, you send it out. When you take that red seal off, you record the seal number, you count the votes, you put the blue seal on, you record the blue seal. In somebody's haste, they missed that process.
And you know that you lost those in the school board race because you were keeping track of that. Do you know, are you certain that no other boxes were lost or mislabeled in
It
other
was a
races?
box of ballots throughout Palm Beach County, and yes, we did audit right away and verified that those were the only ballots, and they were ballots from all over the county, not just the school board race.
So the reason you had a count that showed more ballots was because both the damage and the dupes were counted
Yeah.
in one of these? How did it add up to go from one in the precinct to two?
Because there was a box that was said to be tabulated, but it was not.
So wouldn't that be fewer ballots?
No, that would be more ballots, because we didn't count a box of ballots.
Does anybody else
You
understand that?
duplicate, okay.
Yeah.
The process is that you go through, you send the damaged ballot over here after you've determined voter intent. You fill up a box with the duplicated good ballots, and you seal them, you send them out to tabulation. They are supposed to follow a system, and once those ballots are counted, they get a blue seal. Then it goes out to the warehouse to be interfiled with the other ballots that have been counted, so that we have precinct separation for our manual audit that's required after the election. Do you understand now?
So you guys found the extra ballots as part of the recount? That's where you used to have one vote and you suddenly had two, and you said, wait, there's an issue here.
And we audited 100% of the absentees and found there's some ballots that are in the precinct boxes now that were not counted. So we recounted 100% of the absentee ballots to get an accurate total.
And if you hadn't been doing the recount, would you have still found the discrepancy?
Well, we would have been able to, at our audit, when we're complete, we go through and audit every single precinct for every type of vote. We audit for provisional, early voting, absentee, and precinct ballots. And the way that we return an absentee ballot is through a Pitney Bowes machine, a machine that will give us a report. So yes, before the results would have been official, we would have been able to know that we had a discrepancy.
And how many absentee ballots were there?
We don't know the exact number, but the number of in the box is just under 500.
No, I mean, you
Oh,
said you
how
went
many
back and counted
countywide?
all the absentee, yeah.
There was 62,000 absentee ballots.
Do you know how many of those were disqualified?
I don't yet, because we don't have that report, but we're working on the cleanup, And many of them were disqualified because we couldn't determine voter intent. People used whiteout. I got a ballot with a cigar burn on it, and a man wrote us a letter, a little note to say, "I'm sorry, my ballot is burned, but I went to cook and my cigar fell out of the ashtray." And I mean, we got ballots with food on them, and many ballots with secret whiteout. They just barely, fitted in there, and we really had to hold the ballot up or feel it or something to see, why was this rejected? It has whiteout. Whiteout and ballots don't mix. And so I know that we have a long way to go for voter education when it comes to absentee ballots.
Well, and this brings up, we did want to ask you about this anyway, because you know for sure that really over the last 10 years especially, both parties, Republicans first and then Democrats, have been encouraging absentee ballots, even for people who could otherwise get to the polls, because it's their way of saying, okay, you voted, you're checked off, we can now go on to fulfill our list. But the absentee rejection rate remains much higher than voting at the precinct, right? Doesn't it?
Well, it generally does. Voting at the precinct is somewhat of a problem, obviously, too. We have a lot of people that, we send out a sample ballot. It tells you to connect the arrows. When you sign in at a precinct, you have to connect these little arrows. The top of the ballot tells you to connect the arrows. They circle them, they check them, they mark them, they do a lot of things. And those ballots won't go through our system. So we duplicated, in terms of absentee ballots, we actually did duplicate about just under 5,600 absentee ballots so that we could determine their intent and they could be counted.
But for people who are thinking, well, if I vote this way, my chances are better at having my vote counted, that's a myth, right? Because there are a lot of ways that an absentee ballot can be rejected, and people don't seem to really still, in a lot of cases, know how to use them, right?
Well, a large mass of people don't seem to know how to use them, but what happens is that the canvassing board worked for several days to try and determine voter intent, and there is a Division of Elections rule that allows us to take a look at how did they circle it. If they circled it, we can tell a determined intent, then we can count that vote, but it has to be duplicated. So we have to go back and print another ballot, have somebody fill it out, it comes back. We saw tens of thousands of ballots at the canvassing board for exactly that purpose, not only the absentee ballots, but the precinct day ballots as well.
If a person is wondering whether their absentee ballot was counted, how can they do that?
They can look online. We have a new voter lookup, and it actually tells them that their voting history, it gives them the indication that, yes, we received it back, and we have voting history on everybody whose vote was counted in any manner, precinct, absentee, or early voting.
Let's assume that at the 2012 election, for reasons that may just deal with money and budget or anything else, Palm Beach County doesn't have a new voting system for whatever reason. In that case, are you looking then at any changes in how you transport votes that might speed the results up some?
Well, right now what happens is that we have an officer, a firefighter, and a Boy Scout out at 17 different locations. It works good. It just takes a long time. We're a large county. And once they get 50% of the precinct equipment back, then part of the team comes and brings 50% to us. And the other part of the team stays there. And once they receive 100%, then they transport the rest so that we can start working. What has been tried in office before I got there is regional uploads. And that didn't seem to be as successful, but if all else fails, then we have to try and look at that.
Could you explain to people
What
a
regional
upload is?
Well,
Thanks.
what they did in the past is that they established areas in our north office, in our Belglade office, in our south office, and they actually brought the equipment there, and they had mini tabulation stations. You have to take the cartridge from the scanner and put it into a tabulation system. And so they had mini tabulation systems that would calculate and then upload to the main office.
Because there are how many polling places in the county?
There's 789.
So the idea would be to make that to anywhere part of the county to 150 or 200 or 250 and get them there. Do you think that, is that a reasonable option if nothing else?
Absolutely.
You're going to be looking at that?
Absolutely. If the legislation is not there, if the money is too much, if the county doesn't agree to move forward in this manner, then we will look at that.
Okay.
I have to ask, you have Boy Scouts?
I do. They work really hard.
No Girl Scouts?
There's adventurers and there's girls.
Okay.
That's what they're called. So we do have Boy Scouts and adventurers, and they've been a team of young people, about 45 of them, that have worked with us throughout all of the 16 elections that I've administered. They're hard workers, and they're our runners. They love to work with the officers. They get to ride in the back of the car, and they actually, once the officer brings the equipment to our main place, they are moving it in so that we can start inventorying as it comes in.
And you say officer, you mean police officer?
Yes, sheriff's officers.
And is that a state rule that it's a policeman, a officer, a firefighter, and a Boy Scout, or is that
No,
your
it's
policy?
our policy. It really has been a long-standing way that we transport results, and it's very beneficial. I can't tell you the great job that the sheriff's office and the Palm Beach County firefighters provide us. They are efficient, they are very accurate, and they have radios, so we can find them. And it works very well, and they're very determined, dedicated individuals. We've worked with the same team on a regular basis for a very long time, way before I got there. We added this Boy Scout troop and adventurers just recently, and they've been repeat people that love to come and work there. They work hard, they work long hours.
An elections merit badge? Something
I hope
like
so.
that?
And just because the modems wouldn't put them out of business, but it wouldn't cost them their jobs, would it? You'd still have Boy Scouts
No, we would still have to bring the equipment back into our warehouse.
We heard from a person who was a precinct worker this time, was a precinct worker in 2000, and recalled how one of the problems on that memorable day was that poll workers were calling the main office with questions and couldn't get through. She said at her, I forget but at this person's precinct, it was some of the same problems this year. Did you hear any complaints about phone lines being inadequate, about questions from precincts not being able to be answered?
Well, we actually have added, since I joined, a 99-person phone bank in our office. So it's an increase of what we used to have. Yes, we are aware that we need to have additional phone lines, which are available to us through the county.
Okay, so you plan, at least for the 2012 election, of having more lines?
Yes.
Okay.
How big a role does staffing play in your ability to get results quicker? Is it all an equipment problem, or do you need more staff to handle the counting as well?
Well, in reality, we pick up a lot of temporary help. And currently we have a count of 41 individuals in our office, permanent, full-time. We do anticipate adding, because we've grown so large, adding probably a program person to better administer our whole computer database. And we desperately need an assistant to our service manager at our warehouse, the voting equipment person. And so we have begun adding people, but unfortunately, we really haven't had a lot of time. Before the primary, we had done 14 elections, now 16 elections in the 23 months that I've been there. We actually were successful in closing down 3 locations, 3 warehouses that we used to have, and we went to one large warehouse so we don't lose anything anymore. We've been very busy. The last thing that I provided you was a list of our accomplishments. And I will say that we're very proud to have worked so hard on all the accomplishments that we have made.
You want to list some of those?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I began in 2009, January, and I found that the election office had overspent their budget by $1.3 million. I was able to make up that $1.3 million with existing budget funds, and still we were able to move forward with the approval of the county commission to consolidate our warehouse facility. The county facilities indicated it would take 3 years and $3 million to find a suitable warehouse. We did it in a very short time, about 4 months. Cost us about $650,000, and we got a rent credit of $300,000. We negotiated contracts with the League of Cities so that we no longer expose the entire tax base to legal liability with lawsuits for administering the municipal elections. We renegotiated many of our contracts down and were able to save a substantial amount of money. Some examples as ballot costs went from 71 cents to about 39 cents. We eliminated a $243,000 maintenance contract on our Pitney Bowes, and we changed moving contracts, moving our voting equipment went from $150 a location to $47 within that budget year, even after the $1.3 million and reworking that warehouse that was not in the budget. We were able to give unspent funds back to Palm Beach County in the order of $883,553. This year, we worked hard to revamp our poll worker training. We rewrote the training and the manual. We also hired a poll worker manager, very large role, and we implemented a test for our poll workers for the first time. They're not real pleased, but the individuals who didn't pass the test didn't work this time. We upgraded some of our field computers that are used on Election Day, and we looked at precinct staffing and really did staffing based on voter turnout rather than a standard set of individuals, and that saved a lot of money. I told you that we installed the phone bank, but we also installed a computer program that tracks those calls rather than keeping them on paper logs like I found it. We eliminated attending festivals and home shows where we got a couple of 4 to 6 registrations and it cost us a fee to attend, and we now attend every immigration swearing in at least once a week, and we get about 80 to 100 registrations, and it's during normal business hours and it's not an extra fee. We established some candidate training, and we established classes. We also now offer the candidates data by email rather than having them come and have to pick up the data on a regular basis. We had numerous special elections, and we took $1.2 million out of our existing budget unexpectedly to run them. We lobbied the legislature, and we were successful in getting returned or reimbursed for the majority of them.
And this was this year, this was when you had Congressman Wexler resign, which prompted an election there, and then State Senator Deutsch resign, which was an election.
Well, actually, we had Commissioner Taylor resigned her seat to become a county commissioner, and Ken Pruitt resigned early. And so we had numerous ones, and it's required that the state pay us back, reimburse us. So we were successful in lobbying to get all of our money back except for about $500,000 for the general election in Congressional 19. We anticipate this year returning about $1.5 million of unused budget funds. I told you we also got paid back $288,000 for the sale of the touchscreen machines. We'll return that back, and we'll also return the reimbursement from the special elections back to the county to a tune of just under $2 million. We also are planning some construction in our main building so that we can provide more efficient early voting at our main location. We now have warehouse space that we can use because we moved to a big warehouse, and we've been quite busy.
Can we assume that you will note to the county commission when you bring up the issue of a new voting system, some of this money you've returned?
There's a reason why I have this list.
And you talked about changing the website that reports results to the public. What are you looking at there?
Well, our website has never been upgraded since it was contracted with the company that we have. And in discussions with them, they promised to update the website. But I will tell you that I've seen some independent websites that are very, very efficient, and we are working towards that now.
Will you expand the number of early voting sites for the 2012 election? One of the complaints was the long lines at the early voting sites.
Well, unfortunately, the only locations that we can go to are city halls, libraries, or our offices. And in fact, we were empty in East Boca because the city hall said no and the library said no. So I continue, not only my role here, but my previous role, continue to try and lobby the legislature to expand our opportunities. If we could have large voting center areas, I think it would be conducive to a large county like this. We had 10 early voting sites in the general election. The Supervisor of Elections Association also will be lobbying this year. One of their efforts would be to try and reduce the number of days for the primary early voting because we surpassed the primary total early votes in the first 2 days of the general election vote. and it's very small in the primary, very large in the general. If we're able to do that, I think we can shift some resources, but we need some cooperation either by the cities and the libraries or by the legislature that would allow us to expand to different locations.
And I believe it's come up before, but go over it again if you would. What are some of the sites that have been suggested as additional early voting places?
Well, I personally, when in my time in the legislature, suggested colleges and universities. We have a very low turnout of young people, and I think if you put it right in front of them, they're an instant society, and they might actually vote.
What about grocery stores?
Well, I've heard of grocery stores, and I think we would have to look at the logistics of the security. That would be a major issue. But we want to expand. What we've advocated for in the 2 years that I've participated on the legislative committee for the state association is to give the supervisors discretion. We know of locations that are conducive to our operation, and they have not been receptive to date. And unfortunately, there is a Senate study that indicates that early voting has not increased the voter turnout. It just has provided convenience. In the 2008 election, 20% of the population voted by early voting, and about 24% voted by absentee. So there's just a shift in the way, out of convenience, our voters are coming to us, and we really have to move forward with that shift.
For primary early voting, it's the same period as the general, roughly 2 weeks.
Yes.
You say that you would like, and the other two would like to reduce that to what, 1 week?
Probably 1 week. It's a very expensive venture. It's about $50,000 a location. And during the primary, we never had lines. And during the general, we only began to have lines towards the very end. And so we know that towards the end, people get engaged. But we actually just need more adequate space, more adequate facilities. We were in one location in the city of Delray Beach in a very small room, and that did create long lines. But during the primary, we had less than 100 people vote there a day. During the general election, we had hundreds of people going there to vote. And unfortunately, the location that the city allowed us to be in was a very small room.
Now, you remember in 2008, there was some controversy when the governor extended the hours for early voting near the end. Would the supervisors favor a change that perhaps even allows more hours for early voting in maybe presidential years, maybe fewer days but longer hours near the end to match the patterns? Is that what the Senate study is trying to show?
Well, I personally would advocate for longer hours. When early voting started in 2004, it was longer hours. The hours were reduced by the leadership in the legislature, and they're very, very short hours, only 8 hours total a weekend, and that's when people tend to want to come and vote. And so, the opening day is quite large, and then towards the end, the weekends are really packed because there's only 4 hours a day that we do it. Some supervisors only have Saturdays, and they do all 8 hours on Saturday. I believe strongly that our job is to provide easy access for our voters to come and cast their ballots. And if we have to extend those hours, we should have that discretion.
Right, because right now, how you allocate the hours for early voting is up to the individual supervisor.
Yeah,
correct?
how we allocate
Right.
the weekend hours.
Right, because you get a set number of hours, because you can do it whenever you want.
We have 8 hours a day on the weekdays, and we have 8 hours total aggregate on the weekend.
weekend.
That's the law.
Right.
I wanted to cycle back real quick, if you don't mind, to the voting equipment stuff we were talking about a bit earlier. I had one or two questions about the touch screens you were talking about. In particular, I was curious, have you started looking at particular vendors that provide that? If so, do those vendors provide a paper trail? And considering how kind of touchy of an issue that's been in the past, do you think if we were to move to touchscreens, would you need a paper trail? Would you want a paper trail? How important would that be in picking the equipment?
Well, I honestly got back to my desk on Tuesday, and I think I've done a lot of work to investigate what would be coming that's available with the current law, but no, we have not looked at the touchscreen issue because they're not certified, or they're against the law in the state of Florida right now. And so we need to move forward and look at the technology that's available on touchscreens, and certainly it would not have been hard to attach some kind of paper, like it is similar on a scanner, to the touchscreens that already existed.
I think we saw a demonstration ourselves of the printer that can be attached to, could have
Right.
been used on the old
Yes.
touchscreens that you can't use anymore. Did you
If
have?
they went to touchscreens, do you support a none of the above option so that something has to be clicked on every screen?
Well, I do. I would support none of the above as long as none of the above could not win.
Right, that's always been a caution for people making the decisions.
We heard some complaints that the ballot design de-emphasized one of the Lake Worth races and that there were fewer votes for that. Is there anything to that?
The state mandates the races as they get laid out on a ballot. Most of, all of the municipalities except for Lake Worth have decided to have election days either in February or March because their candidates can end up in a different place. In this instance, one of the races ended up on the back of the first page because we have a mandate. We get a ballot layout requirement by the Division of Elections that requires all of the higher races to go before the municipal races. In working with the League of Cities last year to cut a contract with each city, they actually discussed, would it be less expensive for us to move our elections to November? And because of down ballot drop-off, they decided against that. And in fact, it's my understanding that Lake Worth took up that issue last year and tabled it. Now I hear from the clerk who I work with that they will be taking that issue back up, and they do intend to go to a March election date.
Sorry, not to keep cycling back, but I was a little unclear so how important do you think a paper trail is? Is that something I wasn't clear on your answer, I'm sorry.
I think the voters spoke very clearly. I think that they want to see some kind of something coming out of a machine, and it doesn't appear to be very difficult, very expensive, or high technology to be able to provide it. It also provides us another tier of audit. We actually go through the tapes, and the tapes will help us create another layer of our audit. So if we took those tapes away, we would lose our third layer of our audit.
How well do you think you're doing your job?
I'm there to fix it. I came there for a purpose. And I have to say that I'm fortunate to have some of the most hardworking staff that is in the field. I believe that we did everything humanly possible. We worked these people 18 hours a day, and on our last day of the recount, I felt very badly that some of the people who had been standing before the high-speed counters for 16 hours could barely stand up and they could barely walk. We need to change it. We need to fix it. This is Palm Beach County, and we have had too many years of indecisiveness. I came here for a reason, and I intend to work as hard as I know how to be able to assure the voters in Palm Beach County that they have a consistent and accurate and a timely system. And so that's my answer.
Did most of the problems become an issue in this election? Did they not show up in any of the 14 or 15 elections prior to this?
Now, we experienced the same issue. I think that your paper wrote a kind of critical article after Congressional District 19 special election. We didn't upload those results until 2:30. We're a big county. That's what happens when you have no equipment to modem the information in. And so I think that we were always aware that that was our case, and the County Commission is fully aware that that's how it operates. We've had Commissioner Marcus as our partner for a very long time on the canvassing board, and she's fully aware that we do not have the capabilities and that the technology is really just not there.
So what would you say to voters who might wonder why we're going to just now go to the legislature and ask for the local option as opposed to why we didn't do it, say, last year, if we knew these problems existed prior to this election?
Well, we really didn't have the ability to interrupt the elections that we had, so there was no opportunity. We've had this information about the faulty modems for a very long time. And there was no opportunity because I got there in January. My first election we ran was in February. We continued to have elections. I think it was 14 in the first about 18 months. And there was no ability to interrupt the voting cycles, and we just couldn't do it.
How many elections do you have between now and 2012?
We have municipal elections, and it depends on who files as candidates. The deadline's coming up here in December for some of the cities. We won't know how many cities we'll have. We have 2 cities in February, and the balance of them do it in March.
When would the county commission have to make a decision either on well, let's go, there's two things. When will the county commission have to make a decision on buying new certified voting systems to have that system in place for the 2012 election?
Well, we're hopeful that if either the legislation passes or it doesn't and we consider a new system, that we could do it in the balance of this next year. After the March elections, as far as we know, we don't have elections until the January PPP, Presidential Preference Primary.
Okay, right.
So that's the schedule.
But can you give us some idea of how long it might take from the time when, for example, you sign a contract to buy a new system? How long it would be from then until that new system would be ready for the voters?
It would almost be instantaneous. The delay would be to pass legislation and to get whatever equipment is coming down the line certified at the state level.
Okay.
And obviously they can land us equipment as soon as they can ship it.
Okay. And how long, what testing would you do with a new system to give you a comfort level?
Well, there's a required certification testing that is required at the state level. I think before I could properly recommend to the county commission any system, we would run a lot of things through the system. Obviously, we'd test the modems. The state requires a scanner right now to take 900 ballots, and that's the test. It requires the high-speed counter to take 192 ballots, and that's the whole test. We can blow through 192 ballots very quickly in Palm Beach County. So we'd like to simulate some of our larger elections on any type of equipment that is brought for demonstration to see how well it functions.
Okay.
One last question. I know that with modems, one issue is you have to have a phone line. Would that be a concern with some of the precincts you guys have?
Well, what's probably going to happen is that we're going to redistrict in the state of Florida, and we're going to have to reconsider the polling locations that we have. So I think that if that was anticipated, that yes, we're going to get modems, that we're going to have to move precincts anyway. So I think that we could accomplish that pretty smoothly.
Susan Bucher, Election Supervisor in Palm Beach County. Thank you for coming to the Palm Beach Post.
Thank you for having me.
All right.